just for our listeners, the Gemini Cooperation, right? So this is the new Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd partnership. It starts operations early next year. I love to finish a podcast on a hub and spoke system. So it was a perfect link in for me. They do plan to use a hub and spoke setup to deliver schedule reliability of something over 90%, they're promising. It's quite a claim considering 60% schedule reliability is a bit of a rarity for carriers at the moment, or even over the last few years. So are you a big fan of hub and spoke systems? Can this work?
Right. There really isn't anything to be a fan of here. There is a time and place where a hub and spoke system would work, but there will also be situations where this type of network does not work well. And so we really need to look at it and recognize it for what it does. I think the first important point to point out here is that we have had hub and spoke systems since the very early days of container shipping. So this is not a new idea at all. And for those of you old enough to remember the liner conference system, we had in the past freight rates pricing that are based on base port rates plus transport additionals for outports. And this base port and outport system was built around the hub and spoke system, and that has been around since the 1970s. So again, there's nothing that's new or novel about this system at all. Now, as the container market evolved and volumes grew, some of these outports became base ports as they receive direct calls. So today we now see direct calls at ports such as in Thailand and Vietnam, for example. And we see also in places in Europe, places like Poland and Italy that used to be outports in the past, but they are now today part of the direct port system. So once these former feeder ports becomes direct ports, it is very hard to roll back the clock and for carriers to go back to a hub and spoke system. I think is going to be a problem. I think that we don't need to go very far back to see the last serious attempt to switch back to a pure hub and spoke system. And that is in 2011 when Maersk rolled out the Daily Maersk product for those who were in the market at that point. Now, the Daily Maersk product that Maersk introduced in 2011, that was a pure hub and spoke service because it had only 4 main ports in Asia and 3 ports in Europe. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, the Daily Maersk service did not last very long. There is a long list of reasons behind why that product failed. But I think the main problem here is that, firstly, the market isn't going to pay a premium for the improved reliability that such a product is supposed to produce. And also, the second big problem here is that the spoke system, meaning that the feeder network that you would have to operate as part of that system, that comes at a cost because your transit times and schedule reliability, although it's good on the hub ports, it's going to be worse off on the outports. On top of that, it's a expensive network to maintain because you need to have an extensive feeder network to keep that system going. So as far as the Gemini network is concerned, I think that the hub and spoke approach is really a poor man's response to a fuller product that their rivals could deliver in the market, which Gemini cannot deliver right now because they don't have the scale and they don't have the ships available to provide a fuller range of direct port calls. So if you look more closely at the Gemini network, you will see a lot of gaps in the port coverage. So for example, on the Asia-Europe network, there is no direct calls in many key ports. For example, nothing in Le Havre, nothing in Antwerp, nothing in Southampton, nothing in Gdansk. And if you look at Asia, there is also no direct port calls in key main ports like Busan, nothing in North China, nothing in South China other than Yantian, and certainly nothing also in Vietnam and even places like Taiwan. There is no direct calls. So I think that this is going to be a problem for Gemini to compete effectively with their rivals. I think it's also going to be a problem on the Trans-Pacific. If you look at the GEM network on the Trans-Pacific, it actually has a very weak Trans-Pacific product, especially going into the US West Coast. It doesn't have direct connections between South China to the Pacific Northwest, for example, a very limited coverage of places like Vietnam. And in terms of total number of services, it has only 4 weekly sailings to the West Coast. That's a very small number of direct sailings to the West Coast, because if you compare against the rivals, Ocean Alliance has at least 13 such sailings, and D Alliance will have 10. So even with a weakened D Alliance, they are going to have a significantly superior product to the US West Coast compared to what Gemini has to offer. So again, if you look at the reason behind why Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd is going for a hub and spoke approach, it is my belief that it's not because that approach, that hub and spoke network, is a superior product compared to the more diverse and connected network that their rivals can offer. I think it has more to do with their lack of scale. Again, if you look at the rate of growth that Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd has achieved since 2017, it should be clear that these two carriers are amongst the slowest growing carriers if you compare the carriers in the top 10 list. And this difference is especially stark if you compare the growth of Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd to the growth of MSC, especially over this last 5 years. And so when you don't have the scale to mount a full-fledged network, then the next best thing for both Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd is to come out with the next best solution, which is this limited hub and spoke network. But I think that this is going to serve as a catalyst for the next stage of market disruptions. There's certainly going to be a lot of changes in the next couple of years. There is a lot more that we can cover, but I think we have to leave that for some other time.